Hey guys, welcome to another Ruby on Rails video on my blog/channel. This one's going to be about active record migrations and how you can use them to really scale up a new application quickly with Rails. The beauty of the framework comes with all these generators under the scenes. Another video I did was about the CLI, and that's part of the awesomeness of the framework, in my opinion. So you can do a lot of this stuff on the fly in simple commands, and migrations are something of that nature too. So anytime you create a resource in your app, say it's a model or a controller, particularly model in this case, you're going to actually generate what's known as a migration. And a migration is a way to think of it as alter your database structure in real time. So behind the scenes, Rails has a Ruby DSL, or domain-specific language, that interacts with a database of your choosing. So you could use anything from SQLite, which is the default, or Postgres or MySQL. So between those databases, it generates, this DSL language generates a SQL format. So instead of having to query that stuff by hand and make all those kind of complex queries and changes to your database directly, you can use this language that's way simpler thanks to Ruby itself. And that's the beauty of active record. Probably one of my favorite parts of Ruby on Rails, and just how the framework is so accommodating for someone like myself who really doesn't write that much SQL. So I want to try to show by example, but some of this stuff is just more conventions. So I just want to at least enlighten you on how things work and why they work the way they work. In a given Ruby on Rails app, I've generated just a basic one here, very vanilla. So if we go to my other tab, I've literally got no template or anything on this, just to show context. So if you wanted to try to run this, you certainly can. I am using Rails, the latest version, the beta of 6, so that's kind of cool, on Ruby 2.61 as well. So aside from that, we'll be directing most of our attention to the DB folder in the app. So by default, I'm using SQLite, which is identified in my gem file here. You can use Postgres or whatever else you want to use in this case. This wouldn't be here in that case, but that's just something to note about SQLite. In this file, once you create a resource of some type, like say a model, a new folder will appear, and so will a schema file. So schema.rb. Let me go ahead and create an actual resource. So we'll say, I don't know, Rails. I'll just do a scaffold. I know you shouldn't learn with scaffold, but I want to. So we'll just do post for now. So let's say post. So post is going to be the actual model name. And on that post, we'll have a title, which can be a string. And pro tip, you don't need this at all if it's just a string. Rails will default to that. And then content will be text. So it's going to create a massive amount of files. I need to pass generate. So let me do that. So generate scaffold. There we go. Massive amounts. I wouldn't recommend doing this all the time, definitely, because there's a lot of bloat here you don't need, like JBuilder and stuff that you may not use. Up to you though. So let me go ahead and open up that app back in Sublime. And now you notice that folder there, migrate, and it creates a new actual migration file. And this is the beauty of the language. This is basically SQL under the hood. So this domain specific language, like I mentioned, will actually generate the SQL responsible for creating a new table called posts. And you notice when we generated that actual migration, looks like I cleared it. I used a singular convention of the post type. So that is a big convention in Rails. Your models will tend to have a singular name. So it would be like post or article or product. And then when you actually create that, the database will translate it to an actual plural recognition of that same word. So that's the beauty of stuff you just don't have to think about thanks to conventions. And it's really nice, so you don't have to spend time picking your brain apart about how those things work. So a migration file looks like this, and it's timestamped basically. So each file you generate will have a timestamp as the prefix, and it'll also have a descriptor of basically what it is you're calling it. And in this case, because it was a convention, we created a new scaffold Rails knows that, okay, you're going to create a new post based on the scaffold generation. That's just the default that comes with it. And then it inherits from this active record migration class. So inside that, we have a method called change. And change is great in the sense that it allows you to always roll back these changes if you want to, thanks to the CLI again. So on the CLI, if we go into that, I just do Rails DB, I think. That might not work. Okay, that's going to enter SQLite, so that's my bad. Do Control D to get out of that. So just Rails itself should generate all the commands. Yeah, here we go. So there's a bunch for the DB specifically, and there's one called Rollback that I use a lot that allows you to roll back the given change you've already migrated into your database. So say you run Rake DB migrate or Rails DB migrate, you can actually go back in time however many times you want just by running that command. But you can also specify, thanks to the timestamp on the file, which migration you want to run. So if you wanted to pass in the timestamp, you could too. I don't often do that. I just kind of go down the line, but it depends on how far back you want to roll. Maybe it's a business decision or something like that, where you just want to change things like willy-nilly. Okay, so within the change method, which you've also maybe seen in older gems as like a def, let me go def up and then def down. So that's something you might see in the wild. A lot of older gems have that still. It's not a bad thing. And in fact, it's kind of useful to see certain patterns invoked when they create a resource or change a resource. Basically, whatever it is you're changing, you want a way to undo it. And that's what up and down means. And in essence, in newer terms, this is what this does too. So it's automatically doing that when you roll this back or create it. So hopefully that makes sense. On top of that, we're creating a given table in this typical migration. There's so many more things you can do within an actual migration. So on top of just creating a table, you can change a table, you can update a column, you can remove a column, all these things that relate to databases. So it gets kind of hairy in the scheme of things, but it's pretty neat that you can just run these things basically from the command line in most cases and accomplish so much. So I'll go ahead and migrate this in, and I want to look at the schema file next. So we'll say Rails DB migrate. Cool. So that did it. You'll see a timestamp here too. So that's important. But that's in our database. And now that it's in, we get this file called schema.rb. And this is a file, like you see in the comments, it's auto-generated given the state of the database. And you can think of this as each time a migration is run, this gets regenerated. And you'll see it's actually timestamped as a version as a result. So you wouldn't modify this file directly. You wouldn't want to by any means. Anytime you want to make a change to your database, just create a new migration. By doing that, you can always have a fallback. You can always roll back. And you can always add to if you want. Depending on how big your database is and whatnot. So some big apps out there have a ton of migrations here, and their schema is just huge too. So it's interesting to see if you've ever peeked inside a big project or something like that. But what's nice I find about the schema is that I often come here to see what I name things, like say a column. Here I have a title column. Maybe for some other resource, say it's a product or something, I called it name instead. Chances are I just need to be like, no, what did I call that? So I'll come to this file and figure that out immediately. So it's really useful for reference, and I recommend it. Inside this migration, you might see this thing here too called timestamps. And this is a nice, I guess, automatic thing you get when you run a migration. Any new resource here, you get a timestamp entry, which is a created at and updated at timestamp field on your database. And that comes by default. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to think about it. It just comes with, and that's beautiful. So anytime you want to get, like, say, a date, a post, blog post was created at or updated at, you can just output those automatically in your view and know back in the very back end of your app, Rails has already accomplished that logic for you. So that's great. Inside here, we have different database types that when you passed on the command line, remember one was a string by default and the other was text, this denotes that here. So when this is actually migrated, it knew to create those things within the database, and they translate to these date time properties, text properties, string property, etc. That stuff's pretty great. You can go very deep with the command line and do more with it. Adding certain migrations are also useful on their own. So we created just a model at that point. It created a migration as a result. But say we want to create, I'm going to do another Rails generate scaffold. Do another one called product for now. And we'll just have, again, can be just that. Description will be text. For now, we'll roll with that. Again, scaffolds, yeah, I get it. But there we go. We've got that in our database, or we don't yet, but we do have a new generation migration, I should say. So that creates another file here called products, and you see it's timestamped too. So just like the other one, we've got that ready to roll. We can migrate that into. Okay, great. And then say you want to add a new thing to that table. So how do you do that? You can't go in this file and edit it directly. That would get crazy to try to version and know what you're doing. So let's actually create what's known as a migration, which is kind of a one-off migration file for changing the database structure. And you do this often when you need to add things or remove things from your app. So it's all done mostly from the command line, which is great. So we'll actually create a new one. So it'll be Rails generate migration. And it's, you know, instead of a scaffold or whatever you're doing there, model, it'll be migration instead. And what I want to do here, and this is a convention thing, is describe what it is I'm doing. And the nice thing is if you call attention to the resource I just created, product in this case, Rails will know to do certain things behind the scenes in that migration file, to where you don't have to go in and type it yourself. So a big convention is Camel Casing, you know, how you are changing it like this. So what I want to do is add a SKU number to products. So that's one approach, and that would be plural, remember, because we're targeting the database table in this case and not the actual model in our app. So you want to think plural in that regard. So instead of that, you can also do the snake case, I believe. So add SKU number to products, whichever you prefer. They both translate the same way. I'm going to go ahead and do camel case. And then what you can do there is declare, okay, what's the SKU number? And at this point, you can decide if you want to add that in the file manually. You can go ahead and hit return here and go ahead and do that. If you want Rails to kind of generate at least the what will be the thing you want, it will do that automatically by passing the column name in. So I'm going to call it SKU number in this case. And it can be a string, or you can just roll with that if you want. So I'm going to just do that. It'll create one file, and you see it's timestamped too. So let's go check that one out. So thanks to our naming conventions, Rails knew, or Active Record knew that products meant, oh, you have a products table. Let's add a column to it. And then on that column, we're going to call it SKU number and then make it a string. So that is a migration we can perform at this point. And with that, we can go check our schema at this point. And right now, products just has the defaults we set. So if you went and ran that migration, so if you go Rails db migrate, that migration gets put. So we've got a SKU number. And now you see it update here. So that's great. So we have that string column on our products table now. That's awesome. But say you wanted to name it something else or do something different, you can do a Rails DB rollback. And it'll undo what you just did. So you see it removes the column thanks to that change method. It knows the inversion of that based on what we passed in the SKU number migration. When you do migrate that back or roll that back, it's still a file here. So at that point, you can come in here and actually change things if you want. So you could say, I don't know, like a default. Let's try that. It'll probably bark at me. I haven't done that one in a while. So Rails DB migrate. Let's see if that can change that back. I don't know if this will work. Oops. So with the default null, we have that there. So you could just set a SKU number to default null or something like that. But I'm going to actually roll that back again and just remove that. So just by example, roll back that same migration. And what's great, if I did that again, it'll roll back the previous one. So thanks to the timestamps, we get the create products rollback. But what you can do from there is just run a simple Rails DB migrate, and it'll migrate both of those new ones we created. So pretty cool stuff. So first I'm going to undo what I just did there. Roll back just the first one. Okay, so I'm going to go back and change that real quick. Right here, get rid of that default value, don't need it. And then I'll migrate again. Cool. So that's, I guess, at a high level, how you actually interact with the database in terms of migrations. From there, you can go, crazy with what you want to change. So maybe I want an index on that SKU number. So what's great is you can, again, I'll go back and change that just to show by example. Adding an index helps with speed in terms of searching for products. So we can say, I'll delete. What's great is you can start completely over if you want to. So I'll actually delete this file, and Rails will just be like, oh, I won't even know that existed. So then we'll do the same type of migration. Add SKU number to products, SKU number. So I'm going to pass string for grins now, and then index if you want an index on that actual column. So what's great is it will automatically add that for you. You can go into that new migration. You see a new add index property on there. So it basically adds that index to that column number. And then we're able to search a little faster, I guess, for a product thanks to that index. So we'll say Rails DB migrate at that point. Okay, so what if we wanted to go even more advanced? And I'm stealing this one from the docs, so don't quote me crazily, but I want to add more details to products. And what I can do is add a price and a supplier, but I want certain things on that to be a reference to a supplier itself. So we need to, I'll just do a scaffold of suppliers. So I want to make scaffold, generate shorthand. I'll just do name and call that good. Okay, great, that's in. And then what I want to do at this point is create a new migration for our products model. So that'll be Rails generate migration, add details to products. And you can get super fancy with the command line here and pass in multiple attributes. So I want to add a price, and that's going to look like this. You need to actually pass it in the quotes, and then we'll set it as a decimal. And 5, 2. Okay, and then we'll just do a simple space, and then supplier, since we just generated that model, references, and then you can go in a polymorphic manner there. So polymorphism means things can relate to multiple things. So like a resource, in this case, a supplier can relate to, or products can relate to multiple suppliers. So it's kind of confusing. I'm going to do more on relations in another video because they're kind of a big subject that's important to understand, but can throw you off and it does to me all the time. So don't worry if it's confusing. So I'm going to try to run this. I think I spelt everything right. Polymorphic supplier references. So supplier references, while I'm at it, since I'm adding this to products, I want to have a relation between the product and the supplier. And in doing that, in this case, it'll be polymorphic, but we will actually create a type, in this case, a type field that is a supplier type or product type to the supplier, I believe. So I'm getting in the grains here. I'll just run this just so you can see what it looks like in the end, but I'll go back to that references thing to make it a little more clear. So here's that migration. We're setting a price as a decimal type, and we're setting a precision of 5 and a scale of 2. So those, I'll let you read the docs of what those are. It's just essentially restrictions around how the decimal is displayed. The reference is referencing the product itself. So supplier will have a polymorphic relation to that. So we run this, we could check out our schema afterwards. Cool. So it added the suppliers before too, because I forgot to run that. I wanted to mention that. But then we can go and check out our schema, and you'll see the new indexes based on the supplier type, hence the polymorphic association and the supplier ID. So that's pretty awesome just to do from the command line. This stuff right here is just stuff you don't want to have to type all the time. So it's great to be able to just have this hooked into those automatic generations and migrations in Rails. So that was a little more complex example. It's okay if you don't understand it. It's a little fuzzy for me, to be honest, too. So what I want to do next is to describe what the references association is. So a lot of times you will add a user reference to something. I think I have a user model. If I don't, I'll create one real quick. I'll just do generate model user. Let's say, I don't know, username, email. So if you had Devise installed, you probably already have these things. You wouldn't need to do this. I'm just doing this for example. So I'll migrate that in real quick. All right, so with the user in our app, now we can create a migration that adds a user reference to a product. And in this case, say I have products already, which we do. I'm going to add for each user, say they have a shop or something. This will probably get more advanced, but a user has a shop and they own these products, so they're for sale based on the user. So we'll do another migration in this case that will add a user reference to products. Now at the time, when you create products, for instance, maybe you already knew you had you wanted that user relationship. You could have ran this at that point when you created that scaffold, but if you forgot or just decided to add this later, you still could. So in this case, this would be the later option. So I'm adding this reference later on, and all you have to type is user references. So this is going to be a convention of this is the model, and then this is the references type we're going to pass through that allows you essentially to add a user ID column to that model. So in this case, we're going to add a user ID column to the products table. So running this will do a migration that will invoke that. We can go check out that migration. And it'll actually append a foreign key at that point too. So that's nice in the sense of just being able to look at that user and you know that it's that particular user. So we'll say Rails DB migrate. Great. And then you go to your schema again, and you can see on the users table, or excuse me, on the products table, we have a user ID column now. There is also an index on it based on that foreign key. So that is super useful in the sense of, I remember the early tutorials I was doing, I would actually add a migration just to add a basic user ID as an integer to the table. This speeds that up and makes it way easier, and you get that index as a bonus, which is great. So there's plenty more to chat about, I think, in terms of the type modifiers. So you can pass more. As you saw, we did a polymorphic one. We had a precision one. You can set a limit to actually validate certain things on the database level. Defaults are important. Say you want to have an admin Boolean. So Boolean is true or false. So that would essentially be, okay, one or the other. What you want a default for that when you create it. So anytime, say, a user signs up for your app and you want to make sure they're not an admin, you could set that Boolean of admin to false by default. That's where I would use that use case, and you can add a comment. I just realized that's a new thing. That's cool. This goes super deep, so I want you to check out the documentation, but you can see all the things you could apply with migrations here, which is really great. There's doing things in a reversible manner too, which is more for complex queries where you actually need to literally write SQL in your migrations, which is sometimes possible, or sometimes necessary, I should say. And making it reversible allows you to do things in the specific order you declare when you do the reversible action. Again, check out the documentations. Here's that up-down method. I'll quit yakking, but for now, hopefully you found that useful. I know we didn't get into like looking at the views of the app and stuff, but if you see like product, we have a new product, we have a description on the product, we can get certain stuff back. You see here's my logs and whatnot. I didn't really go deep here. All that stuff is thanks to migrations and really using the generators inside of Rails to make this thing go crazy. So really explore that stuff. It takes some getting used to and understanding, and it feels like you're going to break your app, but in theory you can roll back anything you include or change about your database and always have that available to you. So yeah, I think that's it for now. I'll have more of this kind of content coming up. I think I'm going to talk about relationships, modeling relationships coming up, among other things. So as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.